being able to look at the things that we've been taught, why we've been taught those things, and then how like we're able to, I think it's still something that I struggle with. So I'm not presenting it as this perfect, most like this is the answer and the way to do it, but like how we're able to hold on to those ideals that like I think a lot of us feel good or felt good about, and be able to transform that into what we're working towards moving forward. So we're going to be talking about the 4th of July, Independence Day, the racism that's inherent within the Declaration of Independence, and the way that that's not something we're taught, that's not something that is even addressed when possibly, you know, we're going through it and we're aware of it, but we just don't even have like an acknowledgement of it. And then the way that patriotism is something that's been twisted and transformed into nationalism, and how that's something that is inherently linked with white supremacy and that violence, and how we're able to address that, and being able to practice and have a conversation about like family discussions. One of the most important things, I think, Jean, you know, you were talking about like wanting to be able to live what you believe. I think a lot of times all of us want to be able to know like what to do, and the hardest thing that we need to do is just to be where we're at and change that circle of influence that we have. Sometimes it does mean that we lose people that we care about because they're not able to hear us or accept us where we're at when we're talking about things that they're not comfortable with. But, and I've seen this a lot of times, that eventually those people do realize, hey, I didn't know what I was talking about. And now I know Jean is someone that I can say, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? And those seeds get planted. Might not be something that, you know, we get to harvest or be a part of, but it does make a difference to say something, no matter how small it is. So with that, I think we all know like the first introduction of the Declaration of Independence, right? I'm going to just read that now, is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, I always edit in my mind to all people, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that's one of those things where sounds pretty great. It sounds like something that's created and like we can still agree with. But the way that we're taught the Declaration of Independence really is something where, I don't know if you've noticed, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when, well, one of the things that we'll talk about too is Mount Rushmore, because that's a big part of things, especially here in South Dakota right now. But the founding fathers, right? They are elevated like we do for so many people to in positions of power to like these superhuman places, these pedestals where they're absolutely perfect and without fault, and we can't in any way like bring up the things that they did wrong, that they made mistakes with. And one of the things I hope that this conversation tonight challenges all of us to do, and not just around, you know, the things that we talk about tonight, but within everything, the work that we do, is allowing us to truly live up to the ideals that we think are important by committing to understanding our own histories, both as like individuals, but also looking back to our ancestors, and examine and honestly face the whole of these people. There's a lot of conversation about like accountability, and being able to have that accountability. We have to be able to look at things and be honest where we're at. There is a man named Mark Charles. I don't know if anyone has heard of him, but he is a Indigenous candidate for president right now. And if you haven't, Google him, check out his site, and he's just got really great information. But he wrote for a Native News Online last year a really great article And one of the things that I've referenced and I've talked about a lot is he actually quotes another Aboriginal leader from Canada, Jorge Aramis, and he said, "Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created." And a big part of that, I think, because of whiteness, because of systematic racism and white supremacy, what white folks like absorb and the lessons that we're taught are things that normalize this idea of whiteness and uplift, you know, things to a place where we can't question them. In that same article, Mark Charles writes that this is the dilemma that Native Americans face every day. The foundations of the United States of America are blatantly unjust. This land was stolen. Native peoples, Africans, and many other minority communities have long been recipients of systematic racism, and the roots of it are right there for the entire world to see, printed in many of our founding documents, like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the United States Supreme Court case rulings. Laura, I think there was a part here that you were going to share.
So when we were kind of prepping this conversation and points we wanted to talk about, kind of came to this part about American exceptionalism and like kind of whitewash history and how we tell the story of the founding and the Declaration of Independence. And so my family's really into musicals. Like growing up, we watched old movies, we watched old musicals. And so it was always a tradition for the 4th of July to watch the musical 1776. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. Probably laughing at me if you have. But it's a musical from the 70s about the Declaration of Independence. But it has a very, like there's an entire musical number about like slavery and slave trade, and there's this fight continuing throughout about Adams and Jefferson arguing about the line in the Constitution about slavery and that all people should be free. And so Jefferson has this whole standing on a soapbox thing about how he's going to be some great person, and he's endeavored to free all of his slaves. But then it's so, being a little kid watching it, you're like, oh, he did that, and then you find out later, like, no, that's not actually what went down. And just this, it was making me just kind of this conversation about all the ways in which you're kind of taught a very focus on the good parts and then like everything else is erased version of history. And actually, just as you were talking, Julia, I was just thinking back to that because I knew I wanted to talk about it, that within that, like that musical about the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the country, like not a word is said about like Native American communities. Like it's like they don't exist. So that was just interesting. And just the way we need to, we kind of as a nation just like embrace this idea of like exceptionalism and this like narrative that we're like the old school of founded by God on a principle of freedom, that like manifest destiny of white people conquering the land. And just the way it's, to Julia's point earlier, it's not unpatriotic to challenge the systems. That's what they were doing. They were challenging the system they had, but they weren't really doing it fully, were they? Because people were left out. I don't have a succinct way to wrap that up, but that was...
Well, no, that's great. No, I think that's a really important thing. And there's something that you're going to learn here in a little bit. I think one of the things too is just when you were talking, and this is, when we look at things like the Declaration of Independence and, the structures that we have in place, like I was there's a coalition that's forming here in South Dakota, the South Dakota Coalition for Equity and Justice. And it's specifically to address a lot of the issues that are going on. And one of the spokespeople, Sarah Telehun, was talking, and, she said that these systems, like we have leaders that say these are good, but it's just good enough. You know, it's something that can be better. When we look at these things and we say, well, you know, hundreds of years ago, these, you know, rich white land owners who owned people and, you know, didn't know like what consent was and felt they were entitled to, you know, women and were above like all of these people, like they came up with the best system ever. That's something that's, it's inauthentic, and it's something that to be able to truly live up to those ideals, we have to grow. Mark Charles finishes in that article that I think one of the things I did earlier this week, and I think this is something that can be helpful too as a conversation starter, is just posting on my Facebook and asking people what the 4th of July means to them. You know, what kind of memories does it bring up? What kind of things comes up when you think about it? Because I know for me, you know, Laura shared, you know, what her experience was. For me, I remember huge neighborhood block parties and like making up dances to that incredibly patriotic song, the God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood. And if you like look it up and listen to it, you've probably heard it and like heard it a million times. And in the video for it though, like it really encompasses like this idea of what it means to be an American, right? I'm proud to be an American. And I stand up next to you. And like, there's so many things where like, there is like that thread of like idealism and that thread of like community connection, but then the way that it plays out, it's also a part of the system, you know, that we're in, and being able to unravel that and center in the things that we're able to agree with while also challenging the things that hurt other people is something that's really important. So what Mark finishes with is that, you know, the reality is that the United States of America exists because this land was colonized by Europeans who used a doctrine of discovery to dehumanize, steal from, enslave, and even commit cultural genocide against indigenous peoples from both the New World and Africa. I think one of the things that isn't super common knowledge, and in that article, we'll share the links for some of these resources that we talk about in the discussion of the event, but in that article, he talks about there's a part of the Declaration that I think a lot of people don't realize is there, but one of the complaints against the King of England at the time was that he had endeavored to bring the inhabitants of the frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And so it's something where not only do they not see indigenous peoples as people, but they literally are incredibly anti-Native American. And I think that really goes hand in hand with the way that at the very beginning, you know, that all men are created equal, but of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 of them owned slaves, owned other people at the time they were saying that all men are created equal. And the Declaration does not declare slavery wrong. And it's really something that I think upholds the way that compromise is something that can cause a lot of harm. When we're compromising, I think this is something that when you have these kinds of conversations, you'll see a lot of where there's people that want to be in the middle. Why can't we all just get along? People who aren't willing to condemn the violence of, you know, white supremacy and systematic racism. And they think that being able to say, hey, you know, you really shouldn't hurt people, like, is the same as saying that, you know, if you're indigenous, you know, you're a merciless Indian savage. If you're Black, you know, if you're from Africa, you know, you're only, is it 3/5 of a man? You know, those kinds of things, that's what the foundation of our country, you know, really is about. And we can't get to those ideals unless we're able and willing to face those truths. So that like, that's a lot. And that's the Declaration of Independence. Of the 41 signers that owned slaves, I think it's important to also note that there were people that signed it who also were abolitionists. But I don't know about them. I don't know their names. I don't know, you know, anything like that. And that's something that, you know, a place, you know, to be able to learn more about. So we talked a little bit before about this. You know, we're all in South Dakota. We're from South Dakota. And in case you haven't heard, we've got the president is coming to Mount Rushmore for fireworks. And our license plates, right? We're the great faces, great places. And it's a huge part, like it's our tourism. It's great. There's a lot of was that economic value that's seen in this. But even something like that, the mountain that Mount Rushmore is carved into is in the Black Hills. And the Black Hills are sacred to indigenous tribes. And they were like literally stolen. That's treaty land, unceded treaty land, that because of the discovery of gold, white people, white settlers, and a part of that, you know, that interrogating our histories, a part of that is my ancestors came to the hills and stole the land. And the mountain was known as Six Grandfathers, and you can find pictures online of what it looked like before it was carved. And the man who was a part of carving it, my understanding is that he was a part of the KKK as well. So it's not something that's accidental. It's something that was intentional. A part of that land being stolen too, I think that's really important for us to be aware of, is there was a court case that determined that the land still belongs to the indigenous people. And I think it's like, if anyone knows the number, but I think it's like $1 billion that's sitting in trust because the tribes are not accepting that money because you can't sell something that's sacred.
I think it's $6 billion. Sorry.
$6 billion now? Thank you. And I think that's stuff that is really important for us to be aware of and to know, you know, when we're having these conversations about these things. And us not talking about those things, us not being aware of those things. And I don't know, like, by show of hands, like, who knew that information, who knew about the Six Grandfathers, the name of the mountain before it was carved? So we've got like 4, 5. Who knew about the court case and the money that was offered?
Literally just as of last week when the Battle of Little Bighorn came up, you know.
And so, like, there's things that we are constantly learning, and these are things that we should be taught. These are things that are fundamental to who we are. You know, being able, like that quote, we don't have a common memory. We don't share the same past. And because of that, we can't have true community. To be able to create that community and create a space where we take care of each other, it's fundamental that we do that work to create that common memory. South Dakota did some work with the truth and reconciliation process. And we're going to be doing, I'm hoping for mid-July, a panel discussion with some Indigenous folks talking about the foundation of South Dakota and like our local, our city, county, and state governments within treaties and the way Indigenous people were treated in that process. Because I think it is something that's so important for us to be aware of and discuss. So keep an eye out for that. But that is something where we're doing that work to try and create that common memory for everybody. It's not just something that certain people have that information, but we all should have that to be able to be accountable to it. I'm going to go ahead and let Serene share some just some information about Mount Rushmore and the people that were chosen to be put on Mount Rushmore.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, I want to just like, and I don't know, content warning too, because there's some really shitty shit on here, like just to make sure that people are aware of that.
probably some of I'm gonna read it as I go, and you know, my face will probably change with what I'm reading. I do want to provide kind of a little bit of background. I don't remember if it was Sunday or Monday. Sunday, I think. Okay, so last week, you know, Kello had posted a couple of articles, or maybe it was Argus, about tribe leaders, you know, saying that Mount Rushmore was, I don't remember the quotes, but, you know, basically like needs to go away, and it's disrespectful to the Indigenous communities, and it represents what was stolen from them. And I had shared a couple of things on that, and my mom had commented on one of them, and it's a little humorous to me because I don't see it as much more than what it represents, you know, as far as broken treaties and stolen land, and it's a rock and it's put before people, you know, and an object that's put before people again. And my mom commented and she said, Serene, please don't hate Mount Rushmore. And she says, I know that you're upset about broken treaties, and I know you're upset about stolen land. And she could have left it there, but of course she said, I know you're upset about these things, but think about the history, you know, but they've been trying to give them money and they won't take it, you know. And she could have left it at simply, I know you're upset about stolen land, broken treaties, and that would have been cool. Anyways, Mount Rushmore was the breaking point for my mom seeing my content on Facebook, and she decided to block me, which is not like a big deal to me because, I mean, I can call her and I can text her and things like that. Would have been nice, I think, for her to say something, but also it is good for me now to know that that was her breaking point, I guess, as far as everything else that I've been posting in this past year and a half, and obviously a lot more rapidly as of lately. So learning these things about Mount Rushmore to me is very useful, because, you know, my mom is white. We were from Minneapolis. My dad is Chippewa Ojibwe, and I'm 30% Chippewa Ojibwe, and she essentially took me from my family in Minneapolis and brought me to South Dakota, and we grew up with my stepdad. So I don't know if you want to say the irony in all of that, you know, was kind of her not realizing the culture that she took me from, you know. And I would never try to grab and say that this is me, that this is who I am, but, you know, that is something that my aunt and my grandma and my dad were really devastated that I wasn't there for that, and my mom cut off communications with that side of the family when I was pretty young. So then for her to turn around and tell me not to be upset about Mount Rushmore, like that's a little bit of my own breaking point as well. You know, so, and she's the type of white woman who is very sad. She gets very sad about things, and she thinks that, you know, you should see the beauty in the world, you know, and we all need to work together, and if we just love each other, and you know, all of these, I think that's a kind of a really oppressive mind frame. And when you're leading with those, you're gonna hit a wall. Like, you're just gonna stop, and you're just gonna be sad, and you're just gonna beg people to just see all the beautiful things in life, and you're not gonna impact change, and you're not gonna be able to help the people that really do need your help, and you're not gonna be able to use your privilege where you should be using your privilege, you know? So learning about Mount Rushmore, learning about, you know, just the history, even like I said, kind of briefly, Zach had texted us last week and said, happy Victory Day. And I didn't know that it was the anniversary of what I was taught. It was the Battle of Little Bighorn. And I thought, the Battle of Little Bighorn, and I was like, oh yeah, Custer's Last Stand, you know? And then I was like, okay, I bet there's something not truthful to it, to the narrative of Custer's Last Stand. And through some digging and some articles and help from Zach and Laura and Julia, you know, it was really, it opened up a lot of unrepresented history, you know, as far as what we're taught in the school systems. You know, and as Julia mentioned earlier, that the treaty's being broken because they found some gold in the mountain, and so let's just let's put people to the side so we can get this gold, you know.
I want to jump in. I really appreciate it. Like, I so appreciate you sharing, Serene, because I think that's something that's important. Like, talking about that history is so important. And one of the things we had someone mention is remembering too, like, when we're having these conversations, a lot of the names that we're taught and the things that we're taught very much like represent that, just that one perspective. So like the Battle of Little Bighorn, or, you know, Custer's Last Stand, you know, those were things that were like, we can work to be able to call them by names that like truly represent, you know, what was going on. And I think it's the Battle of Greasy Grass, that being able to name it in a way that like allows the person telling the story, who's giving us that perspective, you know, and shifting that away from those that, you know, had that the violence, you know. And it's things like when we're looking at Black Elk Peak in the Black Hills, you know, for a very long time it was known as Harney Peak, and Harney was a general and not a good human. I think that's the thing that's really important, is for us to shift and realize too, like, all of us are taught these things, and the only way that we learn them is by being open to making the mistake first, and then to being corrected and held accountable. And I think that's a thing that I hope, and I know, like, everyone on here, you know, will do for me. And you know, that's that mutual accountability that really changes the way that we have these kinds of conversations.
So the battle, I'm going to type that in the chat just in case anybody wants to look it up after. The Battle of Greasy Grass.
Yeah, and if anyone knows, please feel free to correct me, but I think, in this, I've been reading some, is that at that time the flag was captured, the American flag was captured by the indigenous tribes, and within that culture, like, that means that the flag belongs to them. It's not something that belongs to the United States anymore because of that. So that's a thing that I have to clearly do more research about, but I think that's a really interesting kind of way of looking at the patriotism that we see, and how it's something that, like, the whole narrative and the whole story is just this single perspective of whiteness, and being able to shift the way that we're looking at it, allows us to really work towards that community and creating a place, you know, that for all of us.
So, right now I'm going to go into some facts about the people that are represented on Mount Rushmore. And this is from Candy Brings Plenty. She is with the South Dakota chapter of the ACLU. I believe she's an Indigenous advocate, if I am correct. Julie is nodding, so I feel confident. Thank you. So she put together some stuff on her Facebook that luckily is pretty relatively simple for me to follow along with. So hopefully I can translate that all to you guys here. We're just going to start with George Washington. So everybody knows we've got George Washington, Abraham. Well, maybe not everybody knows. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and Theodore Roosevelt. I did do that off the top of my head. We're going to start with George Washington. So between him and his wife, they owned 317 slaves. So just interesting, right off the bat, they were not fighting for the freedom of the Black folks that they had enslaved. So I guess I'll use that sometime in my next conversation with my mom about the history. I feel like that's a good one to bring up right away. Commanded his troops to extirpate Indians and Native people who refused to sell their lands, basically commanding his troops to destroy them and completely wipe them out. His plantation, Mount Vernon, was built on land that had been Native communities and villages for thousands of years. Iroquois people nicknamed him, I'm not sure how to say this, but Conotocarius, which in Iroquois means town destroyer, devourer of villages. So those in themselves, just a few factoids, whatever you want to call them, about George Washington that are pretty disturbing, you know, for one person. And this was just one person. The next guy that we have represented, we have Thomas Jefferson. He had 175 slaves that he inherited, and he purchased 20 himself. Sally Hemings, she was his 14-year-old slave, went on to have 6 children with her. He raped her, and I can't say for sure, but I think she was kept in a basement at some point, and I think one of the kids that they had to get, I shouldn't say had together, but one of the children that came out of that, I think suffered a lot of abuse because he looked a lot like his mom. I'm going to type in a chat just to have myself check that out later. He created the forced Indian removal policy, which pushed all tribes from their eastern ancestral lands to the west. Created the civilization program to guarantee the security of white Americans, of colonizers, by tying Native peoples to treaties. Julia, can you explain that one a little bit more for me? I don't really understand that. Or somebody, doesn't have to be Julia.
I'm sorry, which where?
The one created the civilization program to guarantee the security by tying Native peoples to treaties. I think I can understand that, but I can't really explain what that means.
Okay, so what my understanding is, and it's not super super great. So if there's anyone else that wants to volunteer, if they know more, go ahead. But what my understanding is so the treaties that we have in place were not treaties that were made in good faith, like pretty much across the board, right? So it was basically white folks using treaties as a way to bait and switch, fundamentally like trick indigenous peoples to be able to take, what wasn't theirs. I can't remember if this was from reading Custer Died for Your Sins or from a different article, but a part of the treaties made it, and this is how we have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the way that it's categorized, and I am so sorry, I'm not super prepared for this, but it's categorized within our government under like the land management. It's not something like dealing with people. Like it dehumanized indigenous people and made it where they
kind of like binds them, like,
I can help a
hey,
little bit
if you
want.
act right, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Booth.
So what it does is through the treaties, it created a program to change the fundamental ways indigenous peoples did agriculture, to tie them to a white style of agriculture, to ease up land for more hunting and taking away more lands, and more of the converting them into a white way of life. It was to completely take away the natural foresting habits and hunting habits and things like that that the indigenous peoples used so that they could do more land grab.
And so I think that's a part of the, and I really hate this, but it was kill the Indian, save the man kind of thing, which, that's a whole section of that genocide that was perpetrated on indigenous peoples. So I think that his created that foundation for how we interacted with indigenous people, and it was something that was used in ways to solely benefit being able to take that land. And I would love to have a more in-depth conversation about that. There is more, and I do think we shared this on our page, so I wanted to sort of skip forward because it's 8:27. I just want to be mindful of time for people. The last two things that I'll just touch on really quick, so if anybody has to be done at 8:30, they can get the information and go. But if you check out, and we'll share this link, but the list of white nationalist organizations from the Southern Poverty Law Center, so many of those use like patriotic names. There was one, a sticker that I found in downtown Sioux Falls, the Patriot Front, and there's so many of them that use names that like bring to mind like those ideals of America, but they're utilizing that in a very like a very violent kind of way, a very white supremacist way. And I think in some ways it's changing what those ideals are, but I also think in some ways that it is like bringing to light the truth that were in those ideals, right? So that's a thing to be able to be aware of, and like when we're having the conversations with the people that we know, like organizations doing work like that exist here in South Dakota, and they have existed here for a long time. And so like the what can we do part of this, and if anyone does stay, we'll totally be open to conversations and questions. But remembering to find those truths that you believe in, examine why, look at the way that those fit in with our history, and then center in those ideals that we believe in. The things like, freedom and justice, life and liberty, and being happy for all people, not just a certain segment of people. Like I said at the beginning, being able to talk to the people that we are in contact with. The best thing you can do when you're being involved in anti-racist work is to learn all you can, but stay where you're at as much as possible, because you're connected to other, white folks, and you're connected to your community in a way that nobody else is, and you being able to bring up these things makes a powerful difference. So that's, you know, family and friends, coworkers, you know, especially with a holiday like this coming up, engaging in those difficult conversations, you know, even when it feels easier to be silent. You know, Serene, you know, doing that work with your mom, you know, it's hard, it's heavy, and it's really fucking messy. You know, I've gone through that with my family, and my dad's side of the family, I'm not a part of that family anymore. And so it's a hard thing to go through, but realize too that you're able to choose your family, and it's the people that you know, you can turn to and show up. And I think for me, I am deeply grateful for everybody that comes to South Dakotans Against Racism events and has these conversations. And I love it when people message me and be like, hey, this is a thing. What, you know, what do I do? Like, can we talk through this? And I do that too. Like, this is something that bothers me. I don't know why. Can we talk through this? Like, being able to say, I don't know everything. Like, that's the most powerful thing that we can do, because it opens us up to be able to learn and learn together. I think being able to have those difficult conversations is something that's really powerful and really, really helpful. A couple of things I had as suggestions, you know, if you're gathering with family and things like that, you know, Black Lives Matter is a huge thing, huge conversation that's still going on. And there's a lot of people that are misinformed about what it means. But I was telling Serene, Zach, and Laura when we were talking before the call that reading through the Declaration of Independence and seeing the complaints and seeing the things that they're saying, hey, this isn't right, we want to do something better. Like, literally, that's what's being done by organizations like Black Lives Matter. They're doing the work that, like, in so many ways is uplifted, and we have to be able to connect it back to that. So pull up the website, go over the demands. If you've got questions, always feel free to message us, you know, on our page, or me if you're connected with me personally. And then just talk to your family, especially if you've got, you know, white folks that, you know, are part of your family. I think one of the things that's important, like with the conversation about Mount Rushmore and the 4th of July, and if you haven't seen, our governor said that they're not taking any precautions as far as distancing and masks for people that are gathering. So as we're having that conversation, also to bring up and talk about the disproportionate impact that COVID is having on Indigenous people and people of color here in South Dakota. And then
my speedboat still in car.
I think your boat is still in the car. Yes, just a minute. And then, yeah, just keep moving forward. It's okay to be messy. It's okay not to know the most best perfect thing, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I think for a lot of folks, for a lot of white folks in particular, beginning this kind of work, like, it's hard because a part of white supremacy is this idea we have to be perfect, or we're not able to do it at all. But remembering that perfect is like the opposite of good, you know, getting it done. It's okay to do something good as long as you're willing and open to realize that we can always grow and do things better. And recognizing that this work is stuff where it's a lifetime that we'll be doing, and we'll be doing work that sets it up so our kids are able to grow and do something better. So